In this video, we are going to discuss about the different irrigation requirements of the crops. So let's start. The first irrigation requirement of the crop, that is known as the consumptive irrigation requirement. Now, what is this consumptive water that is provided with the help of this irrigation? First of all, we'll recall that. So this consumptive water is the amount of water which is required by the plant for its complete growth, and that is calculated in terms of the evaporation and the transpiration processes, and combinedly we call them as the evapotranspiration requirement. Now this irrigation requirement will be the same one, that is the amount of irrigation water which is required in order to meet the evapotranspiration needs of the crop during its full growth. Therefore, it is nothing but the consumptive use itself, but it will be exclusive of the effective precipitation or the stored soil moisture or the groundwater. And if we ignore these two, that is the stored soil moisture and the groundwater, then this consumptive irrigation requirement, which in short is written as CIR, that will be equal to the consumptive use minus RE, where this RE is known as the effective or the useful rainfall. Now let's say to fill this crop zone or the root zone of a particular crop, this is the requirement of the consumptive use from the crop. Now out of this, certain portion is fulfilled with the help of the rainfall. Let's say this amount of water that was supplied with the help of the rainfall, that means only the remaining portion that has to be supplied with the help of the irrigation, and that is known as the consumptive irrigation requirement. Moving on to the next one, that is the net irrigation requirement. Now it is the amount of irrigation water which is required in order to meet the evapotranspiration needs, and this was nothing but the consumptive irrigation requirement of the crop, as well as, that means in addition to this consumptive irrigation requirement, other needs such as the leaching. Now if we look at the leaching process, what is that? So if let's say this is the ground level at which the crop was grown, and this is the roots of the crop. Now on the ground level, if there are certain salts which are present, which have remained on the soil, so what we will do, we will flood this portion of the area, and when this will be flooded, these salts will get dissolved in this water, and when this water percolates within the soil, those salts are leached into the surface. This complete process is known as the leaching process. So this is known as the leaching process. That means for carrying out this leaching process, we would require certain extra amount of water, and that is nothing but the leaching requirement of the crop. So in addition to the consumptive irrigation requirement, if we take the water lost as percolation in satisfying the other needs such as leaching, then that required quantity of the water, that is known as the net irrigation requirement. Moving on to the next one, the third irrigation requirement, that is known as the field irrigation requirement, which is in short is known as the FIR. Now it is clear from the name itself that this is the amount of water which is actually required on the field. That means if we are supplying the water with the help of the certain channels, and this last path that is having the outlet, the point till which the responsibility will be on the government. And let's say this is the field on which the crop was grown. So this last portion of the water, that is known as the water course. Now, in addition to the net irrigation requirement, this field irrigation requirement, it will take into account the surface runoff losses. It will take into account the surface runoff losses. That means if we are supplying the water onto the field, then this water will be going to the particular crop. Certain amount of that will be going into the ground level as in the form of the percolation. Now certain amount of water that will be runoff. That means that will not be used by the crop or by the ground, and that is counted as a loss. So that means we need to supply the water which is required by the crop, that is known as the net irrigation requirement, and in addition to that we have to supply that much amount of water, and in addition to that we have to supply that much amount of water which can be lost as the runoff. Therefore, for example, if we are having the 60 units of water which is required by the crop, and 40 units is the amount of water which is lost as the runoff, that means we need to supply the 100 units of water to the field, and that is nothing but the field irrigation requirement. And if we look at the water application efficiency, that was the water which was applied to the crop to the water which was supplied to the field. So this water application efficiency, this was the ratio of the water actually supplied to the crop to the water delivered onto the field. So this water which was delivered onto the field, that is nothing but the field irrigation requirement. So that means in the denominator we will be having FIR, and the water which was actually supplied to the crop, this 60 unit of the water, that is the net irrigation requirement. And if we multiply this ratio with 100, then we will get this water application efficiency in percentage. Moving on to the next one, that is the gross irrigation requirement. Now, in addition to the field irrigation requirement, this gross irrigation requirement, it also take into account the conveyance losses or the transit losses. That means, let's say this was the certain river body at which we have constructed the weir or the barrage, and we are having certain number of canals which are taking the water to the ultimately to the field. This is the outlet point. Now when the water is flowing through all of these channels and it is ultimately delivering the water onto the field, when the water is traveling through these channels, it will be giving us certain losses. Now one of the loss that will be in the form of the evaporation, because it is exposed to the atmosphere, and in that it will be exposed to the sunlight, and because of the temperature, this will be the certain amount of the water that will be lost as the evaporation, and certain amount of the water that will be going into the earth in the form of the seepage or the percolation. Combinedly, these two are known as the conveyance or the transit losses. That means the losses which are occurring during the transmission of the water to the field. That means in addition to the field irrigation requirement, that means whatever amount of the water that was required by the field, we have to supply such that, we'll take the same example that we have taken in the previous case, that let's say if the 60 units of water that is required by the crop, and 40 has lost in the form of the runoff losses. That means the total field irrigation requirement that was 100. Now let's say the total losses because of the seepage and the evaporation combinedly, these two are giving us the losses of 20 units. That means the gross irrigation which will be required from this point, that will be of 120 units. That will be the total or the gross irrigation water which will be required to be supplied onto the field, or which is required to be diverted from the canal. Now if we look at this water conveyance efficiency, so this gives us the ratio of the water which is delivered onto the field divided by water which was diverted into the canal, and the first canal that is known as the main canal. So the water which was delivered onto the field, that we know, that is known as the field irrigation requirement, and the water which was diverted into the main canal, this was the water which was diverted into the main canal, so that is the gross irrigation requirement. So this FIR divided by GIR, that gives us the value of the water conveyance efficiency, and if we multiply this value with 100, this value will be obtained in percentage. Now this particular irrigation requirement, it takes into account the conveyance losses. So that completes the all type of irrigation requirement. In the next video we will take a look at the assessment of the irrigation water which is required by the crop. Thank you.